Hello everyone and welcome to this online lecture on motivation. I'm James. I'll be taking you through this talk for the next hour or so and just give you a little bit of background. So I am co-founder of the Nerve Guys with my business partner Gareth Airdley. Our goal is really to take all of the upcoming research as well as upcoming trends in neuroscience and stuff that's kind of working its way into the sporting world at the minute, and start to redesign people's training so that it's kept up to date with this research. That's something we feel pretty strongly about. We have several online programs and courses that are designed to improve people's strength and flexibility, as well as just look at people's general well-being from a neurocentric lens. So looking at things with the brain in mind rather than the body in mind. This is something that is starting to become more and more commonplace, and we literally changed our careers for it once we got an idea of how important it was. I'll leave all of our backstories and stuff like that out of this specific talk, but definitely something that you will see the more and more you stick around with us. Today we're going to be talking about motivation, so it's a little less movement based than the topics that I'm normally speaking about. Normally we will look into people's actual training. I thought this would be interesting for a couple of reasons. One, something I've been interested in for years and years. Before I was interested in neuroscience, I was more into psychology than anything else. That's partly because the research in neuroscience just wasn't as strong back in the early 2000s, so it was easier to find different points of view and different takes on psychology than it was neuroscience. But what's interesting about motivation is that has now shifted. So we have a lot of psychological research. Now we've started looking at the brain regions that are responsible for it too. So I think it's a pretty interesting topic. Number two is that this is a big one almost all the time. So coming after 2 years of a pandemic, I'm hearing more and more people saying they're struggling with motivation to motivate themselves to get out and move or do whatever the things are that they want to do. And it feels like I'm having this conversation so much that it felt like, all right, why not just get all your thoughts into a lecture so you can kind of direct people who are interested towards it. But then also just the general, people tend to struggle with motivation on a kind of sliding scale. So sometimes it feels really good, sometimes it feels really bad. And because of that, and because we're movement coaches and nobody really is paying for a psychologist to be on hand as well as their therapist and trainer and all those other things, a lot of the time it just kind of gets left to the side as something you have to sort out for yourself. And I want to try and give you a couple of tools as well as a couple of reasons to show you, like, this is why this stuff happens the way it does, and maybe by the end of this you don't need to leave your motivation down to chance. I'm going to kick things off with sort of what the beginning of my interest in motivation was. For those of you who recognize, this is Ben Stiller from the movie Dodgeball. And so basically what's happening here is Ben Stiller's character is the leader of a big fitness gym. He has a whole backstory about how he used to be really overweight and hate his body, and trained himself out of it. And no, I'm not saying that that's a great way to think about your life, but what I always found interesting was this one scene and one or two other scenes where he had these games designed to test his willpower, really. So in this scene, he's sitting with his pizza, he's got his laptop open in front of him, it's playing, I think there's a cookery show where they're making the pizza and the chef is describing all the sounds, so he's really overloading his senses here. He's touching it, he can smell it, he's hearing everything about pizza. He's looking at it, and then his whole thing is just trying to resist it and try not to eat it. It's entirely for comedy purposes, but what I always found really interesting was Ben Stiller is the bad guy in this movie, and the whole movie is about, you know, being comfortable with yourself and being happy with yourself, and I think that's a great plot line. Don't get me wrong, if you do go and watch it now, it has not aged well, but I was always really interested about this particular scene because back then, in my mind, motivation and willpower were the same thing, and I always got really confused because this character is supposed to be the bad guy, but I thought, well, wouldn't this be a really good idea? Like, if you trained your willpower, wouldn't it be an effective method to make you more motivated? And that's kind of, while I think not as many people will admit it in as many words, and certainly not so many people are going to think holding a pizza in front of you and staring at it is going to be a good idea for any kind of training. That's really the main thing I want to debunk, is your motivation is not the same as your willpower, and that's kind of going to be the general theme of this whole talk. Willpower plays a part, and we will talk about training your willpower and what you can do, but it's not the only thing, and if you rely on just having willpower to be motivated to do things, I'm going to try and explain why you're going to fail very, very quickly, very, very often. So, goals for the session today. Number one is to understand the neurotransmitters involved in motivation. So, I'll let you know when we see problems, when we see actual problems with your motivation. Very often it's going to be with the neurotransmitters, the chemicals kind of pumping around your bloodstream that go into your brain and all sorts, that spur you into action or spur you into inaction. So we'll talk about what they are, why they're involved in motivation, and what happens at the extremes. The second point is to understand the brain regions involved in motivation. So this is a bit simplified. In fact, everything's simplified. So if you're really into neuroscience, do get in touch, and I can have this conversation in a little bit more detail. But basically, what I'm going to talk about is the fact that these neurotransmitters aren't the only thing playing a part in whether or not you go to the gym today or do the things you say you're going to do. There's a much bigger picture that often doesn't get looked at. Thirdly, this one for me is the most important point. So, as I said, myself and Gareth kind of changed our careers. We were circus performers at one point, and we had always been doing movement and fitness training, but there were certain realizations that we had along the way where we kind of went, actually, this stuff, the emerging research in neuroscience, as well as research that's been there for a long, long time, is really important, and we kind of went, yeah, this is so important, everybody needs to know about this, and that's been kind of our mission. This fuel supply part is one of the most important things for us, and it's how all of our programs are designed around addressing this issue. So it's not just for motivation, it's for all of the movement, all of just your wellness and well-being in life kind of is factored around this little section. So that one's going to be really important. I hope I do it justice today. And then finally, to develop some strategies for motivation training. So figuring out if you're having trouble getting yourself into certain tasks, what is it that you can do to train these things. And it's not going to be training in the moment, so you're not, these things are for training outside, and if you do this training, you should find it easier to get motivated. It's not, I'm not motivated right now, I'm going to do some willpower sit-ups or something like that. Sorry, very bad analogy. I'll try not to do too many of those. Okay, so final thing just before we get going, I've got some recommended readings. So as I said, I'll try and explain that fueling stuff as well as I possibly can, because I don't have any good books on that. But for the actual motivation side of things, I've got these 3 books that I highly recommend. 2 of them I'm going to reference later on. But first of all, this Dr. Steve Peters, The Chimp Paradox, that's probably the most simplistic and well-explained book around how your mind sort of coordinates tasks with each other, and how it can have disagreements, and that's going to play a huge part, especially between your habits, your emotions, and your kind of cognitive free will choice, whatever you want to call it. They're the bits that are going to be constantly battling each other to try and win out, and this book explains it really very well. Next up, we've got Changing for Good by several psychologists, I believe. This book is like almost like a systematic review is in scientific literature, where they look at all the different studies and figure out what they can conclude from it. In this book, they take a number of people, quite a large number of people, who changed their habits, so habits they didn't want to have, whether it's smoking, alcohol, exercise, food, diet, nail biting, whatever you want to call it, whatever it was, and they interview them and track them and figure out what is it that they do. The ones that succeed, what have they done that other people haven't done, or how is it that some people succeed and some people fail? They came up with 6 steps that kind of highlight what you need to do, what the process is you need to go through to be able to effectively change your habit, and talk about how long the process is. Really good book, really good read, highly recommended. And finally, we've got Instant Influence. So this guy, Michael V. Pantalon, he was, again, I believe a psychologist. He was given the task of tackling alcoholism in the emergency room. So the emergency room of certain hospitals were saying, we get people coming in all the time. It's the same people. They're kind of repeat offenders, come into the emergency room with serious problems, and the problems are due to alcoholism. So not necessarily about their liver or health. Maybe they've fallen, had an accident, whatever it was. They knew that solving the alcohol problem would fix the whatever reasons they were coming in. The problem was they only get about 7 minutes to speak to the patient in the emergency room before they have to go and deal with something else. So he was given the task of, can you come up with some kind of script or some kind of system where we could start to encourage behavior change in 7 minutes or less. So that's why it has the kind of cheesy title there, but it's really good system. I'm going to talk through using it on yourself and what you can do. You might feel like it's a bit over the top when you first look at it, but actually this one tends to really work quite well, like surprisingly well, even when you're using it on yourself and you know that's what you're doing. So yeah, I'll talk through that a little bit later. For now, let's just get right into it. So motivation, what are we talking about when we say motivation? I believe the dictionary describes motivation as the desire or willingness to carry out an action. I've changed the or here to and the reason for that is that's what I believe is going to be useful for what we're talking about. So you might have the desire to eat loads of junk food, so by that dictionary definition, you are motivated to eat loads of junk food. Or you might have the willingness to go to work, and that's not necessarily the desire. You don't want to do it, but it's probably going to be pretty easy to motivate yourself to get up and go to work every day. For the majority of people, that's something that's not really that big of a problem. You still just hate it. The the thing that most of us want, though, is we want to be able to do all the things that we like, and we want to do all the things that we like, both at the same time. So that's what I'm going to be talking about training. That's what I'm going to be talking about doing, is trying to motivate both of those things at the same time. And we'll talk about which brain regions are kind of most involved there a little bit later on. So as I said, if you do find that you're able to motivate yourself, whether it's eating junk food or going to work or whatever it is, you probably don't have a huge issue with motivation. There are cases where that might happen, and the two extremes that we might most commonly know would be depression on one side, among other disorders, but depression is the one most people are familiar with, where you end up not very motivated to do anything. So you're probably going to find it even a struggle to go to your job or do any tasks that are actually really important for you to stay alive, in the extreme cases. And on the other side, what happens when you become too motivated? Is that a problem? Yep. Addiction, again, there among other things, but addiction is the one we might be most familiar with. You become so motivated to do one particular thing that it can come at the detriment to your own health. The classic psychology example of this was rats in a cage who were given a choice between regular water or water laced with, I believe it was cocaine. They would take the cocaine-laced water all the way until it killed them. They wouldn't be motivated to do anything else. There were, again, exceptions to that. They had studies where they gave other things to do, so it turned out being stuck in a cage with not very much to do also is a big factor in what makes you addicted, but this isn't a talk on addiction, so I'm not going to get too much into that. The next things to know is that motivation isn't necessarily located in one part of the brain. I'm going to give you two, but again, remember that that's still quite simplified. I'm going to try and show the bigger picture as well. But then finally, problems with motivation are usually not directly related to motivation itself. So if you have a diagnosed medical condition that has lack of motivation as a symptom, there's a good chance, yes, you will have problems with the neurotransmitters that cause you to get motivated. For the majority of us, and in the majority of situations, that's not the case. So I'm going to try and explain that a little bit as well. So let's talk about motivation itself to begin with, and to do that we need to look at neurotransmitters. So as I said, neurotransmitters are like the little hormones or chemicals that shoot around your bloodstream into whatever areas they're needed. And really, for motivation, there's a couple we need to look at. They mainly deal with our emotions and or movement, so stuff that spurs us into action or stuff that causes us to feel good about particular things. So number one, we've got adrenaline. I'm pretty sure everyone knows what adrenaline does. It makes us kick into action really, really quick. If we don't have very much adrenaline, we feel pretty lethargic and slow. If we've got too much, we end up with quite high anxiety. Next up, we've got noradrenaline. That's going to help us to focus on things. So it does a whole ton of things, but we can just use like focus and not kind of trying to look at everything in the environment. It's going to let us hone in on what it is we actually want. Dopamine, this one, most people consider dopamine a reward chemical. It's a little true. It's not strictly true. Dopamine is released in anticipation of reward. So dopamine's job is to say, I want more of this. And that can be if you've just taken a shot of alcohol or a line of cocaine, it will activate the dopamine receptors specifically, and then those receptors say, hey, this feels pretty good, you should devote more resources to getting more of that. So what tends to happen later on is it's not the a line of cocaine that fires the dopamine. It's thinking about it when your brain goes, hey, remember that time that really good thing happened, and then you end up looking for it. And that's one of the big problems with addiction, is that the drug itself, or the whatever the thing is, you can be addicted to all kinds of things that aren't necessarily drugs. But it's not the thing itself that feels really, really good. It's the thought of that thing. So dopamine tends to fire and demands to your brain that you seek out that thing as much as you possibly can and get as much of it as you can. And if you don't get it, it sends pain signals. It sort of says, you didn't get that, that's really bad. You should feel bad about that. That's kind of how most people think about it, and that's how it's often taught on the kind of negative side of things. But don't forget that dopamine is really, really useful in terms of learning. Let's say I'm learning to juggle, and I've just done 3 catches and I almost caught the 4th, and I'm about to get, so my brain says, hey, you could have done that, and it sends some feel-good chemicals into your body, and you feel really good, but also you get this shot of energy, and your hippocampus and all the memory centers in your brain are going to light up saying, hey, whatever you're doing right now, pay attention to every single thing, because we're about to learn something new. So dopamine can have its dark side, but it's a very crucial part of being motivated, because it gives you that boost of energy, and it wakes up all of the memory systems to try and get you to go out and grab whatever it is that you're supposed to get. So really important. Without dopamine, you're going to find it really hard to retain the skills that you're trying to learn, but you're also going to find it that you constantly have to use your willpower to push yourself into doing what you're doing. You're not going to just feel like you're really in the mood to be doing that thing. And serotonin, it's going to help relegate your mood. Generally, serotonin is kind of like the reward after. So you do something good, you feel good, you eat a big meal, serotonin will make you feel nice and chilled out, so that you don't have to go trying to chase a new thing. Again, probably a bit easier to see how that might be good in motivation. If you feel good after doing something, your brain's going to remember that you felt good after doing it, and you'll probably be more motivated to do it later on. So those are the neurotransmitters. Like I said, for a lot of people, the neurotransmitters are working quite well, and there's other things at stake. I'm going to talk through now just about things you can do to boost the neurotransmitters, and then I'll talk through why I think we need to look at the bigger picture. So these are all the things that are kind of given as this is what you want to do if you lack motivation. But remember, these things are specifically written in because they will help not necessarily boost neurotransmitters, but regulate neurotransmitters, because remember, we don't want to have too many or too little of them. But what you'll probably see is this looks like almost every fitness blog that's ever been written. So number one, we've got exercise. So exercise, one of the big positive things, the fact that it is movement, is going to help your brain regulate the neurotransmitters involved in action or inaction, but also it really helps with your blood flow. So if neurotransmitters are having a problem getting to specific areas, then that will help. Sleep, I'm not going to explain. Sleep's going to be great for everything. One of the big things is it's going to flush out all the toxins out of your system that your body usually waits until you're asleep before it starts to really do a deep clean or cleanse, which again is going to be helpful if you've got if you want stuff to be able to freely move around your bloodstream. You don't want to have all this other crap in there as well. The other thing sleep will do is help to formulate memories. So like we said, if you've got dopamine and serotonin kind of changing your mood and changing your energy and trying to create new memories, sleep will help solidify those. Meditation is going to help with your emotional system, so just being present with your thoughts is going to help you regulate your emotions a little better, which again, if emotion is involved in motivation, that will be helpful. music, listening to music that you like. Threw that in there just because a lot of these you're going to find actually take quite a lot of motivation to do. So I wanted to add in a few that actually we can just do straight away. Next up, sunlight, particularly sunlight early in the morning. It's good for resetting your circadian rhythms and things, but that is also going to play a role in getting these neurotransmitters around your body. Next up, saccadic eye movements. I'll talk you through these just very quickly. All you're going to do, you're going to take your thumbs, you're going to hold them at arm's length out in front of your body, and then an eye saccade is where you jump your eyes from one place to the other. So you're going to jump your eyes from one to the other nice and fast. That does a lot of things in the brain, but one of the things especially more vertically, when you're doing them up and down, will help to release more dopamine into your system. So that can be really useful specifically for dopamine, but also for the others. Then a couple of nutritional ones. We've got eating more protein. So it doesn't have to be too much. You don't need to go and buy a load of whey protein powder. That's just not necessary, but just having enough protein in your diet is good to help create these things. Remember, proteins are the building blocks for most of your kind of hormones and neurotransmitters and everything. Probiotics, for a similar reason, can be quite good. And then finally, in terms of serotonin, we also have this nice thing called, where is it gone? Tryptophan. So that's one that you can look up foods containing, or even just take as a supplement. That's one of the only ones out of these that I would recommend looking into as a supplement, just because quite often the foods it contained in it have other amino acids, I believe, that can kind of enter via the same receptors. So they can be worth looking into. Like I said, looks a bit like a standard health blog. I don't think anyone would argue that most of these things aren't a good idea, and that's what you can be doing to be boosting the neurotransmitters or just regulating the neurotransmitters. But what you should probably find, if you have a genuine problem with neurotransmitter regulation and you're doing these things, you should find that has a very conscious and lasting effect on your mood. Now, if you're really not, and it's doing nothing, you might want to look into more medical options as well. There are medications that you can be taking that can also help with severe deficits with any of these. I haven't included them in this talk because I don't think you should be taking very strong medical advice from anyone on an online video. Definitely, if you're having trouble with motivation or with your emotional mood, especially with addiction or depression or any kind of similar thing, see your doctor and see what they recommend as well, because there are, as I said, medications that might help this. But I do want to emphasize that this can be something you can do to get the neurotransmitters going in the right way. But also, I'm sure a lot of you will have tried a lot of these things in many combinations, and you'll probably report that yes, you feel better after it, but it still doesn't make you feel particularly motivated. And that's going to be one of these problems, in that the brain is really complicated. So just having the neurotransmitters ready to go exactly how they should be isn't necessarily going to solve every problem. They might be working perfectly well, but if you've already built all your habits around not getting good exercise, not getting good sleep, not doing those things that you want to be doing, the habits are going to win out. Your brain likes to conserve energy, and it likes to always do the things that it was always doing before. So what you might find is that you make yourself more motivated, but just to continue those things as you were. So we'll talk a little bit later about habits specifically, but also I want to talk about what other things might be going wrong with your motivation. So first we'll look at the brain regions involved. The two brain regions we're going to talk about are in a part of your brain called the cortex. That's kind of the big bit that most of you are familiar with. And basically we have the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is involved in a lot of things. What we're going to talk about for motivation is your willpower and your choice. So when you're choosing specific things, deciding which one is the best option to do is going to be your frontal lobe. Secondly, your willpower. So deciding what you like, deciding to do something that you probably know isn't going to be that fun, but that you should do it, is going to be the frontal lobe as well. Second system is the limbic system, and it's involved with emotion and memory. So limbic system designs all your emotions. One of the interesting things about your emotions is they only really exist with memory, kind of coupled with memory. So your emotions, when your body remembers what stuff is like or what stuff happened before, it will give you an emotion to help you choose what kind of behavior to have in this situation. So to think about this, think about a baby. A baby hasn't learned very much about the world, and because of that, it only really has three kind of states. There's crying, smiling, and not crying and not smiling, just kind of neutral calm. And the baby has to go through a learning process of learning what all of the different signals given by its body mean. So what means I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I need to go to the toilet, I'm too hot, I'm too cold. And it will learn that through either itself or with help of parents and caregivers. Then the next time it happens, then that's going to be coupled with a particular emotion that will remind the baby that, oh yeah, this one was when, you know, you had this feeling last time, you got given food, it made it better, so now I'm gonna distinguish this one from the one where you need more water or you're too hot, so that you know what's wrong. And then eventually that also happens with things outside your body. So you remember when you feel like you're in danger or when you feel socially connected with people. So the more experiences you have and the better they get encoded into your memory, the more you will have distinguishing different types of emotions. And I think that's really important because that we'll come back to that when we think about memory and regulating your emotions. But the other thing that I think is interesting with these two parts of the brain, and the reason I've divided them up like this, is it kind of goes back to what I said about the definition of motivation, the desire and willingness to carry out an action. So we could take the limbic system here and say that is the desire to do something, and the frontal lobe here is kind of the willingness to do something, and those two things will work with each other or work against each other as appropriate. So I might, like Ben Stiller at the start, I might have the desire to eat a giant pizza right now, and my frontal lobe will then have to make the choice and say, all right, yeah, why not? For me, pizza is always a good idea. I'm not in the process of wanting to change that. So while it might be something that people might say, hey, that could be bad for your health, for me, don't care, want the pizza. So I've got the desire to eat it and I've got the willingness to eat it from both systems. They've both given me the go ahead. Second thing that might happen, my boss might be giving me a hard time, and my limbic system might, maybe I'm having a really bad day already and he just wants to just strike out. And what will happen then is my frontal lobe will have to invoke the willpower part of that and say, hey, you know what, that's probably a bad idea. Maybe you shouldn't strike out and hit your boss. That's not going to end well for you socially, financially. Yeah, you don't want to go to jail, so you're not going to do that. So they can work against each other in order to find the appropriate level of motivation for what you're doing. We will talk about how to train both of these systems later so that you find it easier to motivate yourself. But before we do that, I want to just talk through a little bit about how the brain works and why just training this and why the neurotransmitters and why all of this stuff sometimes is meaningless, because we need to understand, first of all, how the brain fuels itself. So we'll start off with this nice long statement. Neurons require both fuel and activation to survive. Fuel from oxygen and from glucose, activation from practice, and we say most activation can be achieved through movement. I'll get to that a bit later. So, neurons require fuel to survive. So when we eat any kind of food, usually the carbohydrates and the fats that we eat will be broken down, and from that will be taken glucose. So we don't have to eat just plain sugar. Our body can break down other foods and make glucose out of it, but glucose is the only fuel really that our brain can have. So our body needs to break down the food, turn it into glucose, deliver it to our brain. For that to turn into energy that our brain can use, it also needs oxygen. So we breathe all the time. The oxygen combines, that causes a chemical reaction. Now our brain has fuel and our brain can activate. The second thing is, while we live in a world at the moment where food is plentiful and air is plentiful, the brain isn't necessarily assured of that. So we probably hope that oxygen is going to stay plentiful because we don't have a way to store oxygen in our body. But for fuel, our brain likes to store excess fuel as fat, as we all know all too well. But also, our brain's always thinking about survival. So it's thinking, what happens if I don't have enough fuel to do what I need to do? And because of that, it tries to work in the most efficient way possible. So anything that is not being used, so this activation through practice part, if we're not activating one part of our brain, it is not going to get given the fuel, and then those brain cells or the connections between them are going to start to die, and then we will be worse at doing that thing. So that's kind of just a very long way of saying, if you don't practice it, you won't be good at it. Where that becomes interesting is the brain is fueled in a feed-forward pattern from back to front and from bottom to top. So what that means is everything in the middle of the brain at the bottom and at the back as well gets all of the fuel it needs, and I'll show you a diagram in a minute to explain why. Then it goes from back to front and from bottom to top. So it'll move to the next layer above and the next layer in front, and it will give that bit all the fuel that it requires, and then it will give the next bit all the fuel that it requires, and it'll go out, and eventually it'll cover the whole brain. Or if there's not enough fuel, maybe fuel doesn't get all the way to the front and all the way to the back. So where we go with this is, without sufficient fuel, many of the brain regions playing a role in motivation will not activate. Now, you might already have gathered from the fact that the frontal lobe is called the frontal lobe, you might have already spotted the problem. If fuel goes from back to front, and the front gets the fuel last, then we can imply from that the bit of your brain that is involved in willpower, so when I wanted to strike out and hit my boss, the bit of it that said, no, don't do that, that's a bad idea, it's not getting fuel until all the other bits are getting fuel. So I might find it quite difficult to resist if my brain doesn't have enough fuel. Most of you are already aware of this by the fact that you get angrier and more irritable and more impulsive when you get really hungry. So that's kind of why, is that sort of conscious thought, the complicated thoughts that you have, as well as inhibition, are all sitting right at the front, and you're going to struggle not to act impulsively because those other regions that make you want to act on your impulse exist in front. So I'm going to show you some pictures that are going to demonstrate that. So on this picture on the left, we've got the brain. So on the picture on the left, we can see the frontal lobe, and as I said, it's quite big, but it's sitting at the front. So in our bottom to top model, we can see the brainstem here is going to get the fuel first, and the cerebellum, and that's going to go, up the way. Once it's gone up, and while it's going up, it's also going to be traveling forwards. So absolutely, the frontal lobe is what gets our fuel last. The limbic system, it's not labeled on this, but it's kind of this section in the middle. So kind of surrounding the thalamus, which is this big kind of blob in the middle here, or the limbic system is kind of several brain structures, but it's kind of right in the middle. So from that, we can kind of see that the limbic system, the emotional system, gets the fuel first. The frontal lobe gets the fuel second. So it's absolutely possible that the emotional system will win out over the frontal lobe if you are not fueled correctly, and that might mean you're not breathing efficiently, so you're just not getting enough fuel in through the oxygen that you're taking in, or it could be that from the glucose point of view, you're not getting enough. So either of those things could play a part. This goes a little bit deeper though, so don't forget activation is important, and if you're not activating a certain region, then it will get less fuel anyway because it thinks you don't need it. So if the emotional system is always getting fuel first, and then the frontal lobe is only getting fuel afterwards, is it possible that if you're not fueled, whether you're again with your breathing or with your glucose levels, that the frontal lobe doesn't get the fuel, and then the emotional system wins out, so you act impulsively, and then your brain says, hey, you're not really using the frontal lobe, I'm going to start switching this off. I'm gonna cut the connections. Eventually, over time, if that keeps happening, you're going to start building up the habits of acting impulsively. So even though when you're adequately fueled, your brain remembers, usually you just go with whatever your emotions decide. So I'm going to let you do that from now on. And it's going to be much harder. It becomes harder and harder because you have to try and force this activation in the frontal lobe to say, no, I want to do the important thing. So that's one important part of it. The other important part is, it should also be apparent, this limbic system is still not very close to the bottom. So what are all these structures? So behind it, we've got the occipital lobe. That deals with vision. Obviously, vision, very, very important to the brain. Vision makes up about 50% of all the neurons in the cortex have something to do with vision. So even all these parts of the limbic system, the frontal lobe, there are regions dedicated to figuring out what the occipital lobe has said. So your vision's super important. Your cerebellum deals with kind of integrating everything, making everything smooth, coordinated, and things like that. So it's going to be really important. Your brainstem deals with some of the really basic things. So can you balance when you're upright? Are you able to breathe? What's your heart rate doing? What's your blood pressure doing? So you can probably imagine why that's at the bottom. If you had to make a choice, if you were given the choice on someone's brain to say, look, we can only fuel the emotional states, or we can fuel whether or not they can breathe, you're going to choose breathing, because without breathing, they can't do anything else anyway. So the brainstem does all of these really basic autonomic functions, and pretty much that's kind of how it's layered. The stuff that you could deal without, so your willpower, while it's really useful, you could probably do without willpower and conscious choice, and you can get by okay in life up to a point if you were just acting impulsively and emotionally. Obviously, you're probably never going to have to make that choice forever, but then if you could also live without emotions if you can see well and balance well and kind of navigate the world well. So it is kind of prioritized in the order that, from an evolutionary point of view, is more important. So nobody's chose it, but that's how it goes. Where this is really important is, let's say we take balance. If your brain feels like your balance is under threat, so let's say you sit down all day in your job, you don't move around a lot, then is it possible that the systems that deal with balance aren't going to get activated so much? I think yes. If they're not getting activated so much, then when you get up and you try and move around, because they're not activated so much, they're probably going to feel like they're under more threat, because the brain has devoted less energy to using them, and then they go, oh man, this is a lot to deal with, we need a lot of energy. And this kind of thing happens all the time, where now the vestibular system, those balance canals, say, we've run out of, like, we can't work hard enough based on the neural connections we've got left, we need more fuel. And so the balance system takes much more fuel than it would have otherwise needed if we had kept using it, and that means less fuel to go to all of these other regions. Same with our vision. Most people are familiar with their eyes deteriorating. Vision can also mean our peripheral vision, our ability to move our eyes smoothly, our ability to jump our eyes from place to place, as in our saccadic eye movements. If our vision isn't working really well, our brain's gonna panic and it's gonna say, hey, give this more fuel, we've got to figure out what's going on anytime something a bit more lively happens in our world. And the cerebellum deals with that, but with all sorts of things. So your thoughts, your movements, your balance, and things like that. So this is why I'm spending so long on this particular slide and trying to emphasize it, is you might have a problem with motivation, not because of your frontal lobe not being able to exert its willpower, not because of your limbic system being able to correctly regulate its emotions. Actually, it could be because fuel is getting used on all of these more basic systems, and that happens way more commonly than you think. Like I said, this is the reason why myself and Gareth ended up changing our entire business model to be just about the brain. The amount of times where we see that improving people's breathing, improving people's balance, improving people's vision, improving people's coordination helps them move through the world better, and because we improve the neural connections in those areas, they don't require so much fuel. We make them more efficient, and then fuel can go to the emotional system. It can go to the frontal lobe, where we can do all our math and decision making, and we see it so often because all of those regions are below our conscious level of awareness. So we might have inefficient breathing, but because we breathe all the time, we just take it for granted. We might not know why we're in a bad mood all the time, but it might just be because when we close our eyes, our brain no longer has a system to balance, because our inner ear is working inefficiently, and we feel like we're going to fall over straight away, and so it panics. And then the layers on top, the best way to think about things in a survival situation is that everything is bad unless we know it's good. So if our brain thinks, oh, our balance isn't great, we're going to fall over, it will not let enough fuel go to the emotional side of things. Our emotions are more likely going to be biased towards bad unless we have a good reason for them not to be. So sorry, long time on that slide, but really important that we understand that the way our brain fuels itself means we absolutely must get good at regulating this autonomic bit. And while it's a bit of a sales pitch, that's the bit we do well at the Nerve Guys. So if you feel like you do want to be working on your motivation, I'll talk through how we can improve through fuel, but this is stuff we can absolutely help you with. So do get in touch if you feel like you would like to inquire about this further. So first of all, breath and lung capacity work. The better you breathe, the more efficiently you breathe, the more likely your brain's going to have fuel. Remember, glucose can be stored, so even when your brain runs out of glucose, it has to work a little bit harder to get it, to break down the fat that is stored, but it can get it. If we're chronically hyperventilating, it's much harder for oxygen to get all the way up to our brain and to be used. So training your breath, training your lung capacity is a really important part. Maintaining appropriate glucose levels. So if you're going to be trying to start new habits, if you're going to be doing something in your day that's really different from what you normally do, or if you know you've got really important choices coming up, make sure you've eaten appropriately for those times. I'm not going to lecture you on what kind of diets you should have, or whether what time of the day you want to be eating. Just to know, there are a lot of studies that show you make better decisions after you've eaten than before, so that can be really important as well. And then the third one is balance training. I'm going to lump vision in there as well. Your eyes and your inner ear are involved in keeping you upright. When your brain isn't confident that you're not going to let it fall to the floor, it will spend all of its energy on working on that and keeping you balanced. It doesn't care so much about everything else. So when we make our inner ear and when we make our eyes work more efficiently, that has a huge improvement on how the brain can fuel itself. So really important. I spent ages on it. I apologize, but I hope that is hammered in. Now we're going to talk through stuff that you can do for improving these motivation systems. So we're going to talk first about improving just read it straight off the slide. We're going to talk first about improving emotion. So like I said, this isn't in the moment where you go, I need to be motivated right now, I'm going to do some emotional work and that should help. This is stuff that you should think about in the background. One thing I didn't put on this slide for emotion is meditation. Meditation and practicing emotional intelligence can be really good for your emotions. I find for motivation as well, there are some things that we can do a little bit quicker. I'm not saying don't meditate, don't practice emotional intelligence. They're amazing, especially if you find your emotions are all over the place. You've got big mood swings, stuff like that. Absolutely look into it. These are kind of shorter term, quicker fixes that we can be looking at for motivation. So number one, this is going to sound weird, but bypass emotion altogether. So a lot of the time when you're thinking, I need to go to the gym more, I need to eat better, I need to spend more time with my kids, when emotion is the problem in motivation, usually what you find is that you think about it, I need to go to the gym more, and then you start catastrophizing. Your brain says, well, you're not going to the gym, you're going to be unhealthy, you're going to think of all the bad things that will happen, and you're going to think, oh, can I really do this? Is it going to be really hard? I'm going to have to change all of these things. And so you come up with all these reasons that gives you just a more and more negative emotion. And so then you never build the habit of going to the gym. One of the problems is a lot of the time people try to train emotion and habit at the same time. So if you're not already really good at developing new habits, it's probably a bad idea to try and do it at the same time as regulating your emotions as well. So one of the things you can do is start to build habits of things you don't care about. So when I wake up, I'm going to roll a dice 3 times, every time, no matter what. I'm going to try and spend a minute a day doing absolutely nothing. So I'm just going to find 1 minute in my day, I do nothing. If you fail, what does it matter? You didn't do anything. But what should happen is, if you can turn those things into a habit, especially the free 1 minute in a day, you start to get good at the idea of, oh, this is how long it takes to build a habit. This is what obstacles I'm going to face. This is what challenges I'm going to face. It almost turns it into a game where you're like, oh, cool, well, let's try this, let's try this, let's see how it works. Then when you get to the important habits that you want to form, you're still going to have those crazy emotions. What if I fail? What if it doesn't work? How difficult is it going to be? But at least you can see the path. So now you only have to try and manage your emotion. You don't have to try and manage the learning how to build a habit at the same time. Second thing, this is a bit more of a distraction. So practicing coordination tasks, like I said, it's going to help fuel your brain better. That bit at the back called the cerebellum is going to deal with coordination, and when that's better, you're going to find that there's more fuel available for the emotional centers in your brain. But also it can work as a bit of a distraction, but plus your cerebellum actually can deal with future thoughts and kind of developing smooth thoughts. So working on coordination is often a nice thing you can do if your emotions are really just getting the better of you. Just do dexterity exercises, so whether it's index finger, eyes closed, touch your nose, make it a little harder, try and do it while you're balancing, or try and do it with your eyes closed, touching a light switch or something that's not attached to you. Just work on kind of dexterous coordination tasks can be really useful. The third one is social or financial accountability. So this is kind of a negative thing, but what tends to be the case is people have the biggest negative emotional reactions from things that happen negatively socially and things that happen negatively financially. So what we're looking at here is like this kind of little circuit breaker thing where if you make yourself socially accountable to someone and say, hey, I'm going to go to the gym every day, you want to come with me, or do you want to check in on me? Especially if it's somebody that you care about socially, so their opinion matters to you, a lot of the time you end up thinking about it's suddenly the negative emotion of how much work is this going to be, what if I fail, etc. Is clouded out by the bigger negative emotion of what happens if this person loses their respect for me, or whatever it is, and that can often be a motivator to get you to go and do something. Same with finances. People are really loss averse, so if you wager a huge sum of money that you're going to be able to do something, especially a meaningful amount to you, oftentimes you're going to find it works much better. So that's a negative option that you can use. Obviously, negatives aren't necessarily as good as positives, so I'll finish on a positive one, and that is to create positive meaning in your actions. So a lot of the time, people, when they think about changing their habits, or when they think about motivating themselves to do something, like I said, our brain thrives on survival, which means always assuming the worst in stuff. It thinks about what happens when it goes wrong rather than what happens when it goes right, and what does it mean when it's not working versus what does it mean when it is working. That is like a one-way ticket to just not doing that thing. So thinking about the positives, creating the positive meaning is a really good way to go, and I'm going to talk you through an exercise on how to do that. So as I said, this comes from Instant Influence by Michael V. Pantalon. He came up with 6 questions. This was for the ER doctors or the nurses to ask or try and work into a conversation with alcoholics which were coming in. It had to last less than 7 minutes. What I'm going to recommend you do is take these questions and write them down and just answer them. Make the answers as long as you like, the longer the better. But what you'll notice is they're all positively framed. So number 1 is, why would you do the thing? So go to the gym more, eat better, socialize more, spend more time with your kids, whatever it is. Why do that in the first place? So it's kind of argue to yourself, why is it good? The second question is, how ready or how motivated are you to do this from 1 to 10? So 1 means you're not even thinking about it, which is pretty unlikely given you're already on question 2 of a motivation thing. Number 10 is you're already doing it. So again, if your answer is 1 or 10, you probably won't be doing this at all. 10, you'll already have done the thing that you want to do. 1, you won't even be thinking about it. The second question is, all right, well, why didn't you choose a lower number? Even if you chose 2, so you're only just at the stage of even thinking about it, why not 1? Why are you even thinking about it in the first place? This was the most important step that they found in this stage. Was a lot of the time people think, what would it take to get me from a 2 to a 3 or a 3 to a 9? And they come up with, this is what I would have to do, and then they come up with a reason why they can't. And again, that's the brain catastrophizing, deciding negative is worse than or better than positive. So why didn't you choose a lower number forces you to once again argue for all the reasons that you are motivated to do it right now. The next question is, what would be the positive outcome of doing the thing that you do? So going to the gym, you're healthier, more confident, whatever. You argue what positive things would come from it. There's no question mark there, I apologize. Next question is, why is this important? So in the gym example, I'm healthier. Well, why is being healthy important? You're going to die anyway, so is it I really want to see people colonize Mars. I want to see what happens to my kids when they grow up. I feel awful right now, and I'd like to just feel better, whatever it is. Then the final is, what is the first or next step? So if you're already doing stuff, what's the next step? Otherwise, what's the first step that you can take? This one is really important in terms of when you commit to an action. Studies have shown that for most people, so we're getting, at the time of recording this, we're getting close to Christmas. Most people say, all right, so I'm going to eat better. I'm going to start in January, and that's the end of the conversation. And what happens is the brain sends out feel-good hormones just on the fact that you thought you were going to do it in January. So the fact that you've said, I'm going to commit to myself, I'm going to start this in January, you get the feel-good chemicals right now. That's pretty much like giving somebody the money for something and then not taking any personal details, hoping they're still going to come up with the goods a month later. They could very easily just disappear, run off. And that's exactly how your brain normally works, is you do that, you feel good, then it gets to the time of actually doing it. Doing the task doesn't feel good, so you then say, oh yeah, today I'll have a day off, I'll start tomorrow, and you get the same feel-good hormones from saying you'll start tomorrow as you will from actually starting right now, but without having to go through the negative of doing the thing that maybe you don't really want to do. So deciding what is the first or next step, even if that's not doing the thing. So you say, still, I'm going to eat better in January. The first step is I'm going to make a plan, and I'm going to start planning things out. And what you want to get into the habit of doing is, as soon as you've gone through this process, or as soon as you have had the thought of being motivated, you want to get into the habit of starting right away. Doesn't mean you have to start eating better that instant if that's not what is suitable for the occasion, but you do need to make the plan. You do need to start throwing out foods that you don't want. Whatever you've decided is your first step, you must start immediately, even though you'll probably fail a number of times, which we're about to come to in habit. The fact that you get into the habit of starting right away is going to be really useful for eventually achieving long-lasting habit change. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break for water. So roundabout now is when my voice is going to start to go. Okay, so next part of improving your motivation is improving your habits. So not all lack of motivation is through emotion. Like we talked before, I want to go to the gym, and then you start feeling like you feel actually negative about it. That's one side of it, but not necessarily, it's not always going to be the case. So your habits are going to play a big role too. If you think of a time when you might need to look at the habits more than you need to look at anything else, think about that I want to go to the gym analogy. I have decided, okay, I'm going to go to the gym after work. Absolutely. I've decided that, and my brain is convinced that I mean what I say. I get on the train, I get off the train, and now there's two directions. One leads to my house, one leads to the gym. As I'm walking closer and closer to that divide in the road, I'm still thinking, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to the gym. And then there's a point where suddenly this doesn't make sense. I'm now actually just walking towards my house. Like, the emotional thing isn't super huge. There's still an emotional drive to, I'm gonna actually go home, but it's not the biggest part. This is where you need to look at habits and what's going on there, because what's usually happening there is your dopamine system has already weighed up the two options and says, hey, there's not so much dopamine in this, we can't see the positives. We're going to give you a flood of dopamine to make you want to go home, and to remember, one of the things, if you don't do what your dopamine is telling you to do, you get pain after. So your brain kind of goes, yeah, we're going to go home, because if we don't do this, we're gonna feel really bad. So a couple of things about improving your habit forming. One, memory games. This is weird, but if you're trying to build a new habit, habits aren't the same as memories. Habits are what your brain has programmed in so that it doesn't need to remember stuff. So it's just what you're going to do anyway, no matter what. If your memory is really bad, you're going to find it really hard to develop new habits. So I always want to, in all these, I want to put in something that isn't huge, that you can just start to do. Any kind of memory games, whether it's one I do with, I wear contact lenses at the moment, so one of them is slightly stronger than the other, so every time I take out the boxes, I use the contact lenses, and then I swap the boxes over the next morning. I've just got to remember which one's on top. It could be as simple as that. It could be turning cards over and trying to remember where they all are, remembering a sequence of numbers, remembering a list of words from morning to nighttime, or it could just be, I'm going to memorize pi or some kind of set thing where it just, the memory of it, the rote memory of it is quite difficult. Your memory doesn't have to be amazing. You don't have to be in a memory championship. It just, if you're using your memory, it makes it more likely that you're going to be able to use it for building a habit. Second thing is to find the triggers. So dopamine works with triggers. There's a certain point in my example where I'm walking home where I've decided I'm going to the gym, and then dopamine says, hey, you could just go home right now. And then what I need to do is try and find that point in my walk or in my journey where I start to feel that way, because that's going to be the bit that is hardest to change. I'm not going to be able to use my willpower to drive me the other direction if I end up at that point. So in my example, once I've kind of found what is triggering me to want this, whether it's a street sign that I see, or maybe it is just that divide in the road, maybe then I don't take the train anymore, I take the bus. So I've got to kind of find out where is the point where I suddenly go, this doesn't make sense, I'm not doing the thing I said I would. And then try and bypass it by putting an intervention in somewhere before. Similarly, creating obstacles. So sometimes the triggers are somewhere where you can't escape, so they might be at work, or more often, let's say I always keep my freezer stocked up with loads of pizzas, and I've finally decided I don't want to eat pizza anymore because I think it's unhealthy. Just to be clear, I love pizza. It's not the case. But then I might say, oh, actually, I'm going to take them out. I'm not going to keep them at home anymore. So every time I decide I want a pizza, I've got to physically walk to the shop and come back. And the more obstacles, so it could be I have to walk to the shop, it could be that actually I don't know, put a padlock on my oven at the same time, so even once I get back from the shop, I've got another obstacle. The idea is that the more obstacles you have, the more likely it is that your willpower can start to win out. So you get to the front door of your house and you're like, hang on, I don't want this, it's cold outside. Why am I doing this? If the habit's strong enough, you're probably still going to go. Then you come back, padlock on the oven. I'm not sure how that works, so I thought of something as quick as I could. Then and again, you're like, I'm doing this, I don't want to be doing this. If you can put enough obstacles in the way, often you can start letting your willpower win out. Similarly, if the pizza is on like a delivery app, Deliveroo for example, uninstall the app every single time you use it. Again, just ways of adding additional obstacles. Finally, just making notes. So one of the things you'll notice, a lot of these are kind of big in the background things. For habit forming, you want to make as many notes as you can in reflection of what do you think is working, what is not working, what do you notice about your day, when do you start having certain thoughts over other thoughts. The more information you can gather, the more likely it is you'll find triggers, obstacles for your habits. I'll talk through a little bit as well. One of the other things that's quite annoying about habits is you might get really far and then it feels like it's all for nothing because you relapse. That's where I'm going to reference this book, Changing for Good. In it, they look at the 6 stages of habit change, and what they talk about is actually everybody needs to go through these 6 stages. People who don't go through all 6 tend to be very unlikely to maintain habit change. But most people need to go through it several times, or at least part of it several times. So number 1, we've got pre-contemplation. So we don't need to worry about this too much. Pre-contemplation means you're not even thinking about changing. So the fact that you're thinking about it means you're already at stage 2, which is contemplation. Stage 2 is just you recognize there's a problem. So I might eventually switch from I love pizza to maybe I'm eating a bit too much of this. I don't want to do it so much anymore. And that's all it is. I might phase in and out of not thinking it's a problem, and then maybe this is a problem, maybe it's not. I might jump back to pre-contemplation. The 3rd stage is preparation. So pretty much if you don't prepare for the habit change, it's probably not going to happen. So like I said with the I'm going to eat better in New Year, if you just go right, starting today, I'm going to eat better, it's probably not going to happen. That you'll start having to, you'll come up with loads of like, oh, well, hang on, what about this? What about this? Are there exceptions? Are there, how am I going to deal with this situation? The better you prepare, the more likely it is it's going to stick. And the other thing to note about that is you probably won't prepare very well the first time. So remember I said there's going to be relapses. The 2nd or 3rd time around, you're going to think about what went wrong the first time, and then you're going to prepare it better. The 4th stage is action, so this is when you start to implement it. The 5th stage is once you've gotten going, once you've kind of built the momentum, is just maintaining it. And then the 6th stage, which you don't necessarily ever have to reach, is termination. So is there a point where you decide, I no longer need this habit, I can end it? That's kind of up to you to decide. And the important point is this may be cycled through multiple times. You can go to any point on this and jump back to any other point. Very rarely people jump back to pre-contemplation after action, but the research shows that people can go through this up to like 10 times or more. And if you're aware of that, and if you can accept that, it makes it less upsetting when you relapse. So you relapse, then you go, okay, cool, I'm going to regroup, I'm going to think about my preparation again. It makes it much easier to change your habits. So I hope that's helpful for you. Okay, nearly at the end. I realize I've been speaking for quite a while. I'm going to take one more quick water break. Okay, so improving your willpower. This is where it can become a little unpleasant. So I'm going to start off with the nicest one, strength or movement training. We saw the frontal lobe was quite big at the front of your brain. One of the areas situated in it is the motor cortex, so it deals with voluntary movement. While it's not based around willpower exactly, the more energy you can get to the frontal lobe in any capacity, the more likely it is that the rest of it will work better. So if you just incorporate moving, which could be exercise, could be getting sweaty, or it could just be any kind of activity where you move around, you are more likely to be able to exert your willpower than if you're completely sedentary. More importantly to that is if you're doing strength training, that's almost like willpower for movement. So strength is where you have to resist against stuff and you have to do it even though it sucks. That's like training your willpower, but in a physical capacity, which is usually much easier than in an entirely mental capacity. Your brain is built around movement, it evolved around movement, and so having a physical component is often really good. Okay, fasting is number 2. This is a bit weird since I said always maintain good amounts of glucose, but remember that was for when you need to be motivated. If you're training your willpower, you're trying to train yourself to exert your willpower when there's less reason for it. So intermittent fasting can be a really good idea, not necessarily for your whole life, maybe a week in a year or a couple of weeks, whatever. Just having that little period where you force yourself to still try and make good decisions when you don't have the easily available store of glucose can be really useful. But again, remember, if you've got important decisions, really important things, you might not necessarily want to be incorporating that then. Then I added in cold exposure. I kind of include in this anything that isn't that pleasant. I don't want you to go and hurt yourselves, but anything where you know it's not going to be fun, but you're going to do it anyway, and it doesn't matter that much if you don't. The reason I chose cold exposure as well is it has a lot of other health benefits. So cold showers, going out in the cold and just focusing on the sensation can be really good, but any kind of unpleasant task that doesn't really matter to you and that doesn't leave you physically or emotionally damaged is potentially a good idea. One that we can do right now, gaze stabilization. So all you got to do, take your thumb out in front of your nose. You're going to stare at your thumb and literally just have a staring contest with it. So see how long you can hold your gaze on your thumb without blinking, without looking away, and training that. Again, your eye muscles want to move all around the place all the time to figure out what's in the world. This is just another willpower one to say don't do that, and actually the eye muscles have to work quite hard. I threw it in again. It's nice to have something that you can do sitting down, knowing that you're trying something. Then finally, air hunger. This is where you're gonna breathe in, breathe out. Once you've breathed out, you're going to hold your breath for as long as you can. It's going to be really unpleasant. You probably won't get very long, but just do it as long as you're able to. And then once you need to, breathe in again. Practicing air hunger drills can be really useful for willpower. Make sure you're sitting down or lying down, especially if you're new to that one though. So that's willpower. Final one that I'll talk about is choice. So the final issue that you might have with motivation is you might just be paralyzed by, I know I need to do something, but there's so many options, I don't know what to do. 3 simple things that you can do for this. One is prediction tasks. So these are all things that are kind of in and around the same brain region of the frontal lobe, and that can be helpful, but also can help the act of making a choice. So prediction, let's say, basically just guessing things and seeing if you were right. So that can be things where you could be expected to know the right answer, like let's say I'm walking down the street and I see a lamppost. I say, I think it's going to take me 20 steps to get to that lamppost, and I test it out. I walk 20 steps. If I'm correct, yay. If I'm not, whatever. But you can then use that to get better. So every lamppost you see, you can start guessing, and after a while you should notice your prediction is getting better, and you can do that for anything where you can guess the right answer and improve. You could also have it kind of gambling style tasks, so flipping a coin and guessing whether it's going to be heads or tails. You can't possibly know whether you're going to get heads or tails every time, but that will just force you, even though you know you can't know the right answer, it just force you to make a choice. And again, we're taking all the emotion out of it because it doesn't matter. If you get it wrong, who cares? Second one is go or no-go exercises. So basically, if I say the word go, then you've got to raise your hand. If I say the word goat, you've got to remain still, stuff where you have to decide to do something or not do something based on similar stimulus. I'll talk through some brain training games that you can get that deal with these really well. But you could have, as an example, if you read through a text, if it's a vowel, you raise your hand. If it's a consonant, you remain still. Something like that. You're going to have to be creative. I don't have too many other than the apps that I'll talk about. Finally, mental arithmetic challenges. So whether it's a set thing, so I'm going to count backwards from 100 in 3s or 7s or whatever, or whether you just have someone fire numbers at you and you've got to add them together or subtract or multiply. Again, it's using the kind of logical side of your brain to act quickly and fast, which should help spur you into motion and action. As I said, there's some brain training apps that I recommend for these. One is Peak, the other one is Lumosity. They really have quite a number of things, so they can do pretty much most of the brain regions in terms of emotions and cognitive thought. They have games that train. I believe both of them have a free version, so you can play them without paying, and they can help with these things. So for the kind of frontal lobe exercises especially, definitely recommend those games. So there we go. It was quite a long one. Thank you for sticking with me. That is motivation. As I said, check out those brain training apps for the motivation centers. Do get in touch if you haven't already about training with us. If you're interested in the fueling patterns of the brain, finding out what is working efficiently, or just keeping yourself well-rounded, well-balanced. It's something that we provide, and I believe we do quite well. So thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you at another lecture.